Hi guys, I'm Darren, and usually this time of year I'll be having a video saying here's the new INAV, what's in it. So where's INAV 6? So quite a few of you probably already know the answer to this, but I thought given the time of year that's usual release schedule, I'd put a video out for anyone that doesn't actually know what's going on with INAV 6. In this video I'm going to cover why it's been delayed, when we can expect it, but I'm also going to go through some of what is in the next version of INAV. This won't be a long video like the release video, I will still do one of those, but we're just going to take a quick look at some of the pull requests. The flight controller's got the latest master of 6.0, I've got Configurator started up, so we'll get onto that very quickly. So what has happened? Well, basically one of the changes is a pretty big one. And what we wanted to do was make sure that it was tested thoroughly before actually going to the release candidate stage. That change is actually one of the major changes to INAV 6.0, and it's an update to the AHRS, which is the Heading and Attitude Reference System. Many of you probably know about the drift issues, where if you do long, slow curves, the gravity on the vector will actually sort of make it think that the ground is actually offset, so your horizon is tilted. We've covered this in other videos before, so I'll link to the horizon drift issues. But there is a change in 6.0 which basically eradicates that issue. If you have noisy setups, that can still cause drift. So if you have lots of electrical noise, so if you're getting issues through your video feed that get picked up, you know, if you've got like high quality video transmitters or systems like DJI or Walksnail or HDZero, these may be filtered out by the VTX, but if you're getting noise like that, that can have an effect on electrical components, not just the gyro, but also like your regulators, that sort of thing. So it's not a good thing. Make sure you have capacitors on your ESCs to try and smooth these things out. But also if you have a lot of vibrations from propellers, that sort of thing, that can still cause issues. But these are quite extreme cases. So with INAV 6.0, we actually, I believe for the first time, released a feature preview version. And this was back, I believe, in October. That was really a few selected parts of 6.0, including this AHRS update, because that was the main thing that needed testing. And since that time, we've only had one confirmed problem due to horizon drift. And that was quite an extreme case. And actually, Mark got hold of the black box logs that luckily they were recording. And there was like 5G of vibration on the gyro. So that's why that one drifted. But for most people with clean setups, there's no problem at all. So I mean, that was quite extreme. It must have had like quite a heavily damaged prop or even a weak motor mount, something like that causing that issue. So as far as drift goes now, we can basically say it's gone. But that and a few other features coming along are why it has been delayed. So what we can expect to see is end of Q1, I guess, next year, 2023. We will see sort of the standard process going through. So we'll see some release candidates coming out. And once we're happy that the release candidates are all good, then the stable version will be released. So we're probably looking around March next year for either that process getting started or for the release to come out. So it's not that much longer to wait, but it'll be well worth it and well worth updating every INAV craft you've got to 6.0 just for this AHRS change. So what else has been happening? Well, what I'm going to do is flip over to the computer, and I've got open the GitHub here, which has a list to all pull requests that have been merged in 6.0, and I have those for both the firmware and the configurator. So what I'll do is I'll put those links in the video description, and then you can check out all of them at your leisure, and there will be stuff being added between this video coming out and the release candidates. So let's have a quick look through here. Right, so some people might find this first one interesting, the AHI pitch interval redraw. What that will do is, instead of just having the one AHI, it will have sort of staggered AHIs. So it's almost like having a ladder like you might see on the FreeSky Pixel OSD, for example. So instead of just having the one horizon line, there's multiple. So as you sort of pitch the nose up, you'll still get a horizon line that is offset. So that's that option. The next one, RTH Trackback, that is a really, really cool feature. The idea behind this feature initially was for maybe like a failsafe, that sort of thing, but you can use it on regular RTH too. But basically what it will do is, as you're flying around, it will record points of where you've been flying. It's got a limited number of points and it will work up to 2 kilometers. But what it will do is, as you fly the plane, it will track points of where you're flying. So if you're flying in a straight line, it will track less points, meaning you can go further, that sort of thing. And also I believe it avoids loiters. So if you just loiter, it will just have that as one single point rather than having a loiter. But the idea is, if you lose signal and go into failsafe, which was the primary use, what it will actually do is fly back along that path until it either reaches the end of that trackback path or you get home, depending on which happens sooner. The action that follows after that generally will be a standard return to home, or if you're at home, it will do whatever you're supposed to do at home, either loiter down or land, whatever your settings are. The whole point was, say for example, you fly behind an object, a hillside, that sort of thing. When the signal gets lost, the plane will turn around and come back the way it came, on as close to the path as possible, so it avoids hitting anything until it can get that link back. Once you've got the link back, you can take back control. But coming back on the way that you've come in, it's a lot safer rather than just coming straight back directly to home. So that is a really nice feature. I'll go into that a little bit more in the proper video. There's been a couple of OSD elements that have been added, 2 of which were requested, the other one was thrown in as a freebie. It's all freebies, isn't it? But anyway, so glide time and glide distance were things that were actually requested, and now they're in there. So if you're on a glide slope, it will let you know basically how long of the glide you've got at the current speed and altitude change, and also the current distance along the ground that you can get with this current glide slope. The other one that was added was a climb efficiency. So if you're climbing, it will let you know, I believe it's the watt hours. Yeah, so if you're climbing, it will let you know the, I believe we went with this one. It's the amp hours per vertical feet or meters, depending on how you've got your OSD set up. So you can get an efficient climb going. Right, this one is quite an important one. The off option has been removed from NAV extra arming safety, and that has been for safety reasons. The chances of having a flyaway if you have that set to off are pretty high. So this is now not an option, but you can still have the functionality if you want it. If instead of using off, you just use allow bypass, all you need to do is yaw to the right when you arm, and then it's effectively the same as having off. The only difference is when you unplug your battery and plug back in again, that setting is cleared. So to get the extra safety off, you have to yaw right again when you arm. But other than that, it's exactly the same. So this will still work fine for a lot of situations where people tended to use off. So for example, if you're doing a whoop race where you're indoors but you have a GPS, you can use the right yaw and arm to trigger that the arming safety is off at this point. Fly around. If you crash and have to disarm and rearm, don't worry, it remembers it until you unplug and plug the battery back in. So this will work just as well if you needed to use off. But in most situations where you have a GPS and you're flying outdoors, you don't want this in an off position. You want to get those 6 satellites locked, otherwise you don't have a home position. Return to home won't work. So that off has been removed. There is now an option where you can manually control the throttle during your auto launch. So instead of having it automatically go up to the levels, you can actually control that manually. Auto level has been added to course hold. I always thought it was in there, to be honest, but it was only really an angle or horizon. But now course hold, you can use the auto level tuning mode. Right, another thing that has changed is the HUD offset. I've added it to the OSD page as well. But if you used to have to offset your HUD, which is this part in the middle here, before it sort of worked backwards. If you wanted it to go down, you would use positive numbers, and if you wanted it to go up, you would use negative numbers. These have been flipped. So you will need to change that in your CLI when you do a diff. It's all going to be in the release notes, so obviously make sure you read the release notes. But I have also added it to the OSD page. So if I go 2, you can see that it's shifted up. If I go -2, you can see it's shifted down, which to me Negative is down, positive is up, a lot more intuitive. The reason it was the other way around is because of where the 0 point of the OSD drawing is, but yeah, we shouldn't need to worry about that. We should we should just sort of, yeah, I need to go up, so I'll make it a positive increase. But there we go, that's in there now. There have been some fixes with the wind estimator. These work a lot better now, so you get a lot more accurate wind estimation. You do need to sort of every so often fly like a circle or something like that, just so that it knows all orientations. If you fly straight for too long, the data sort of becomes stale. It is working, it's working a hell of a lot better than it used to, but just bear in mind that you do need to sort of change course every so often just to keep that updated. The icon will actually let you know when the data's gone stale now, so that's really handy, but it will still show you the last known good wind speed. Right, so the waypoint tracking has improved a lot. Again, I'm not going to go into this deeply because, you know, I want to try and keep this video short. Let's see if the examples are on here. I know Mark has tested this a lot, but the actual waypoint tracks are massively improved. So I'm just going to show this brief example because it sort of ties in something that I'm going to mention. But you can see here, this is the position of the waypoint line, and the pink dotted line is the craft's flight, and you can see it again in this photo. So there's the waypoints, and this light line here is the flight. So you can see it's sort of matching and then going back on course, which is a lot better than how it used to work. I've seen examples where, to be honest, it makes this one look quite bad. Usually there have been some examples where it's come out spot on and tracks along the line perfect. So this is showing that the waypoint tracking has been improved. And to be honest, this was in August, and I know that there have been improvements made since then. But this highlights another thing that has come to INAV 6.0, which can be useful for a lot of people if you want to test stuff out on the workbench, but is very good for developers. And this pull request here is a prime example of that. So this line here is actually generated using X-Plane, which, if you don't know X-Plane, it is a flight simulator for sort of real-world aircraft, and it's accurate enough that some companies actually use it to train pilots with sort of fully built cockpit, but in the background it's X-Plane running. And what has come about with INAV 6.0 is the ability to use INAV within X-Plane. So for us with smaller planes, the physics aren't quite as good as with the full-size planes, but we can get a lot of very helpful information from using this simulation. It is basically on anything you flash with INAV, so all you need to do is connect your flight controller via USB. So if it's in a model, that's fine, and all you need is a receiver connected. And what will happen is X-Plane will provide stuff like GPS, altitude, the speed you're going, that sort of thing, all the sensor data basically. And INAV will process that and then send it back to X-Plane, which will then control your aircraft on screen. And it is basically like flying the plane. For testing purposes, we don't have to pack everything up, go up to the field, you know, wait for a nice day for weather. Like at the moment, it's sort of minus temperatures outside. So it means we can get a lot more work done and a lot quicker too. So this top track line was actually from X-Plane in a simulated flight. So you can see the waypoints, it's the exact same mission, and you can see how the flight has gone and how the waypoint has gone. And you can see this bottom one is from a black box log of the real world flight. And you can see that they are pretty close. I mean, this was running the same firmware, same mission. The only difference possibly would have been wind conditions, that sort of thing, during, you know, the real flight versus what's in X-Plane. But you can see that the tracking is pretty close to what was expected. So this tool is very useful. If you're not doing development, what use is it? Well, you can actually use it to test your plane. So for example, you build a new plane, you can obviously check modes and switches and stuff like that on your transmitter and how the plane reacts, but now you can plug it into X-Plane as well. So you just plug in your flight controller, you've got your transmitter, you can make sure left is left, right is right while flying the plane. Also, all your mode switches work, all that sort of stuff is in there. So you can fly the plane. that support is there. So there's details in there about how to download the planes, that sort of thing. And if you look on Roman's GitHub here, there's quite a few useful bits of information on here. And you can see here, this is X-plane with INAV, and all the data on screen is correct. And Mark actually made an AR wing that flies really nicely. He's gone to get it as close to the real world as possible, because to be honest, the planes that you could get to begin with weren't brilliant. But yeah, Mark has made this little AR wing called the VR Noob wing, and that works great. He's even got the tuning information for you, so you can just put that in your CLI and it's all set. And that's what I'm using for testing. But yeah, this default Noob wing works absolutely spot on. So thank you to Roman and Mark for doing all that. Right, so let's move on. So there's been a change added to the multi-mission where you can actually change the missions in flight. There's been support added for the DJI What the Flip OSD, so you can actually set the size correctly. This was in the feature preview, but I believe there were a couple of changes that went in after that. But yeah, WTF DJI is supported fully. There have been a few parameters that have moved from profiles sort of back into the master settings. Basically, they didn't really sort of belong in the profiles. So just to let you guys know, in case you have these in profiles, the changes are loiter direction, because why? So that's been moved. And also fixed wing min throttle down pitch has been moved. So if you had either of those in the control and battery profiles respectively, they will now be in master. If you do an import and you only have one profile, it will just import it. If you have multiple profiles, it will take whatever is in the last profile that gets imported. So just be mindful of that. Again, this is going to be in the release notes. There is support for HDZero's 30x16 size OSD. I believe this is to try and get the refresh for the OSD faster with HDZero. So that is not in FP1, but it is in the master. Yeah, so here's the update. The return to home trackback will suspend recording if you're in a loiter. And again, the waypoint turning and smoothness tracking accuracy adjustments, you can see that was 21 days ago. So as I mentioned, the waypoint tracking has got even better than what I showed earlier. And I have seen examples where it is just straight along the line. There was a problem with the incorrect temperature being shown. I saw a post this morning in the INAV fixed wing group about that. So just to let you guys know, it has been fixed. You don't need to let us know about it. But that one's come up a few times, but don't worry, it will be fixed in the master release. There's been quite a lot of little bug fixes, new targets, and very nicely sort of document updates. This one might be useful for people. There have been some new programming operations added in the logical switches, and they are edge, delay, delta, approximately equals, and a timer function. If you open up this pull request, it will actually give you some examples of how they can be used and it working. One thing that people really wanted was some way of timing things in INAV. In the programming, there are now 3 different ways of doing it. Edge isn't necessarily a timer, but I've added a delay as an optional operand, so that now effectively makes it a timer. So once something triggers, it will be active for a certain amount of time, then it will switch off. And the delay is the opposite. Once something triggers, it will wait a certain amount of time before activating. So we have 2 different timer methods there. And then we have a simple on-off timer, which you'll be used to in OpenTX. So how long is it on? How long is it off? And it just keeps alternating. So there's 3 different timers now that you can use in programming. We have the approximately equals from OpenTX, and also the delta. So if the value changes by a certain amount, it will then trigger that logical switch to come on. There have been remaining time and distance elements in INAV's OSD for a while, but they've always used the fly time OSD icons. They've now been fixed, so they have their own icons. The logo has changed in size. Now, if I click this, when you flash INAV, it won't look any different because the logo that you get in the default font will look exactly the same. But if you know anything about the fonts, you'll know that originally this was just a square, and basically 2 columns have been added either side to try and make it a bit more of a rectangle, which is a bit more usable. So if people want to have their own custom logo, there's a lot more option with a rectangle than there is a square. So that's something that hopefully will be coming. But also with things like the digital systems where you can just get a font, add your own logo and compile it, this will be a nice option for you just to be able to throw in your own logo. So yeah, that's something that you probably won't even notice, but it is in there. Right, the maximum safe distance for a waypoint mission has been increased. This is something that people had been asking for. Originally, there was a 650 meter limit to how far away the first waypoint can be. This has now been changed to a maximum of 1.5 kilometers. And also, while we did this, the units were changed from centimeters into meters, so it's even easier to add it. And if you notice here, there is actually a tool to convert the diff. So there are other things in the pipeline which would use this tool to convert, especially if you're using waypoint missions in programming. Don't use this tool at the minute. It will only be for when this version of INAV comes out and you want to do an update. But basically anything that requires a change in CLI, I'm trying to put into this tool, so the diff process is a lot simpler. Of course, this doesn't affect filters or anything like that, so if they do change and it's recommended to do that all from scratch, please do that from scratch. This is just for settings where this is mentioned, so it will update this nav waypoint safe maximum distance, and the programming stuff for the waypoints, when that comes in, it will update those too. But anything for filters, mitigation code, PIDs, any changes would require you to do that from scratch, please still do. The tool won't update anything to do with that. This is a nice change, and again, most of the time you may not even notice it. So the fixed wing nav altitude control fix. This is something that has been in INAV for quite a while, but you didn't sort of really notice it. But there was one specific case where it would sort of become apparent every time. And that's if you did a return to home with linear descent, but arrived home above your home altitude. Instead of just continuing to descend, it would actually sort of bounce off of it and start climbing again. And then eventually it would settle down and then start descending. This fixes that and just makes the altitude track a lot better. So it's something you probably won't notice, but it is in there and it is a nice improvement. There have also been OSD elements added for ground course and the course track error. So with fixed wing, we're not necessarily pointing the direction that we're flying. And this is especially true with things like crosswinds. Say you're the ground. So you're looking at me, I'm the sky. We're flying our plane and this is the wind. So the wind is pushing us this way. So our heading will actually go this way into wind slightly, but our ground course will be this direction. So that's our ground course, that's our heading. We now have indicators in the OSD to show you, first of all, what the ground course is. So that will be, say 0 degrees because it's straight up. And our heading may be sort of 5 degrees just to compensate for the wind. So they're the main changes in the firmware, and we'll take a brief look now at the stuff in the configurator. Some of it has already been mentioned, so we won't need to go over it. So the glide stuff and the HUD, the AHI offset I've already mentioned. There are expanded labels for units, so let's have a look at that. So if you hover over the unit, it will pop up a little label giving a full detail of what the units are. The time zone offset has been converted to hours in the GPS rather than having to use minutes. Now this next one is to fix a bit of confusion. When we talk about making a circle in the sky with our planes, we always describe it as loitering. That's basically what we're doing. From a multi-rotor point of view, you're in position hold. So there was always this discrepancy between the nav mode called position hold and then loiter, which is what we use to describe things. But also if you look on advanced tuning, everything is like loiter. So we have loiter radius, that sort of thing. So there's been this discrepancy, and I have actually seen quite a few comments and questions from new people saying, how do I use the loiter mode? So in 6.0 on the mode screen, instead of seeing nav position hold, you will see nav loiter. This is exactly the same mode. It's literally just being renamed in Configurator to make it more fixed wing specific, but also should help new people know what's going on. There have been resources added for HD fonts. So let me open that up. If you're used to working on the analog fonts and have made your own analog fonts, this is basically doing the same thing but for digital. So at the moment, the only font set on there is for Avatar, but of course, if anyone else has a font set that they would like to share on there for WTF or HDZero, then feel free to sort of add like a default for those. And importantly, a tool for compiling them. These were just early examples. This was basically taken from the analog font and resized, and the second page was missing. And this was an early sort of implementation of the HD font for Avatar that JetTrail did. So you can see it looks a lot nicer. So if we go to resources and OSD, if you've worked on the analog font, this is normal. You know about this. But now it's been divided into analog and Avatar. Of course, we could have what the fuck, WTF, and HDZero here as well. That's not a problem. And if we pop into analog, it's the same thing. We have a README, we have the different fonts, each with all the PNGs for the individual characters. And the same has happened in Avatar. So we have our nice README document, and we have a default font. What we have here inside default is actually the sizes of the characters. So 36 by 54 is the large, 24 by 36 is the small, and 12 by 18 is basically the same size as analog. It was requested by WalkSnail, but I don't think they actually use it. And if we pop in there, you can see it's exactly the same as analog. Each character has its own PNG file. Yeah, you can work on those the same as you could with analog. So all you would need to do is make a copy of the default directory, make the changes to your font, and then compile the font with the tool. There's a brief documentation here, but if we go to this repo here, you can actually download the tool to compile the font, and also there's a lot more sort of detailed information about how to use the tool, that sort of thing. So if you're interested in making your own font, I mean, specifically for the WalkSnail system at the moment, but as I say, hopefully we'll get some more tools linked and maybe more fonts in there for other HD systems. As I mentioned earlier with the larger logo, this is where this could be really useful. You could just download the font that you like, change the logo to whatever you want, use the tool to compile the font, upload that to your goggles, and you're sorted. If you're coming from 5.1, you will notice that if you're using HDZero, there is no longer an HDZero option on the ports page. If you're new with INAV 6 and you've got old instructions and it tells you to use the HDZero OSD on the peripherals, you don't. You just use MSP DisplayPort going forward, and that will get everything working. There has been a button added for reset accelerometer. Now I am going to go into this, even though it's quite a basic one, because people have been having problems. Right, so first of all, if you're using FP1, it will look like this. So if you've calibrated your accelerometer, you've got all ticks here, you have a red button here with reset accelerometer calibration. The idea with the red button was as a warning that if you click it, it will make a change that you might not want to do. But people had been sort of seeing it as there's something wrong with the accelerometer, I need to reset it. So the button has been changed to grey. If you see reset accelerometer, you don't need to do it. It's not a problem. Everything here is all ticks. It's all good. The idea with this button is if you think that there's a problem with the calibration, it allows you to reset it back to 0. So you would click the reset accelerometer calibration button, and then when the flight controller reboots, you'll have your calibrate accelerometer button back again, so you can do the calibration. That was really the whole point around the button. There was also an issue with some flight controllers that it wouldn't recognize that the accelerometer hadn't been calibrated. It should have done, and on my test flight controller it worked absolutely fine. And if we go to setup, there is this accelerometer calibrated option, and that was what I was testing. If that's green, then it should be calibrated, but for some reason it was coming back saying that it was calibrated when it wasn't. But you can see here now, this is just like a dark grey. It's not a warning, you don't need to click it. These are all blue, it's all good. And there's even red if you hover over it, just to let you know that it will reset. The warning is don't click the button if you're happy. But yeah, so that's there. If you reset that, you'll get all these back to the default settings, and then you'll get your calibrate accelerometer button again. In 6.0, there is an option where if you don't go into the firmware flasher, it automatically detects your target. So you can see here, it's just popped up saying that it's a Matek F405 SE. And if that doesn't pop up, you can try clicking the button, but chances are if it didn't automatically detect, it won't. So that is something that has been added. And there was an issue with older firmwares that was found on FP2, so that has been fixed. So it works fine with whatever firmware you got now. It won't necessarily auto detect, but it won't stop you doing other things, which was the problem. There have been improvements to non-metric unit handling. Quite a few people had seen a bug where I believe it was some min-out setting. There was a setting where the minimum was 50, but it was going to 49. This was due to a rounding error. It now checks the minimum and maximum allowed in the default units, so it can never go outside of those defined parameters. And it will also increase the number of decimal places that you can have if it's not an integer value. So if it's not a whole number and the conversion worked out, it should have had 1 decimal place. It will then increase that to 2 decimal places, up to a maximum of 3. As we were on advanced tuning, there have been quite a few changes on here with a few extra things added. Notably some navigation settings. There have been added options for the RTH Trackback with the sort of maximum distances. There's the safe home modes, so this is a lot more useful. And also the return to home climb first stage options, they're all on there now. But yeah, you can see that there has been work going on, and there is still work continuing. We can see there are 8 open PRs that have been assigned a milestone. There's probably more PRs that haven't had a milestone assigned yet. So that's in the firmware and also in the configurator. You can see there's a couple of extra things there. But yeah, this is not necessarily all that may be added. I know for a fact that there's something that I'm working on, 2 things that I'm working on that haven't even got a PR yet. So there's more that's still to come in INAV 6.0, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what's going on, why it's not here yet, when we can expect it, and what's happened so far. But yeah, if you're interested, check out those links. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to click the subscribe and the bell icon. That will help get this video out to more people, but also you'll get alerted for my other videos, which you may also find interesting. Thanks for watching, guys. Fly your models like you stole them. See you on the next one.